I'd like to introduce you all to Alex Bastian. Some of you may know him, some of you may not. He has agreed to take on the topic of pharma pricing practices and the case for market self-correction. I was a little worried when his first question was whether or not there was a door behind him. But he does have a provocative talk that I've gotten a chance to preview. Alex comes to us. He is a fellow Golden Gopher from the University of Minnesota, where I went to medical school. He completed his MBA at the IESE Business School in Barcelona, Spain. Go Barça. And he is, to those of us in the know, he is well known as somebody who has extensive ties into every, if you will, the triangle of the oncology market, payers and manufacturers and providers. And for those of you in this space will recognize that he is one of the drug pricing whisperers out there. So we're very excited to have him and looking forward to your talk. Alex, thanks for coming.
Okay, so first off, I'd like to thank the Institute of Medicine, the Planning Committee, and the host of speakers that this morning really gave a good kind of outline for some of the things I hope to discuss today. I think it's a really important topic because how decisions made in the marketplace influence not just innovation, but also the prices, the way that families deal with it, the way physicians prescribe. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the curtains so you can see behind the stage, let's say, to see how this might work in the real world, how it might apply in real practice. Because a lot of what we've heard may not be something that could actually become reality, nor something that we would want. And so hopefully I can be provocative and provide a counterbalance to the narrative we've heard so far. I'd also like to thank in particular Cindy for her discussion on innovation. I think that one of the things I'd like to say as I begin this talk is that innovation doesn't pay for the price of past development. The price of drugs pays for the future innovations. What I'm going to show you on the first slide right here is what's typically known as a product life cycle. Okay, the product comes on the market, it rapidly ramps up, it's on the market for a specific period of time, and this would be no different from a loaf of bread, from a car, from any other good, except for within pharmaceuticals and biotech, there's different forces, different influences. What I'm going to do is lead you through today on some of those, but the most important points of the product life cycle have to do with three things. How fast does it reach its peak? The second, what is its peak and how high is it? And the third thing is how long is it on the marketplace? A lot of this has to do with patent protection, and in the United States, they're offered a de facto monopoly for a certain amount of time so they can recuperate costs or make profit. And attacking some of these principles is attacking the patent system in the United States in itself. But what I want to do is actually hone in on some of the features that we can influence and that go into pricing decisions today. So what you're going to see in this first piece about time to peak, I'm going to go over briefly because I think that it probably has less of an impact on price than some of the other factors. What we do know is that there's 5 key features that go into how fast something will reach its peak. One of those is fast and broad coverage, which of course our payers know well in the United States because of CMS mandates. They have, or they're compelled to cover many things depending on class regulations. And so what happens is in the US, upon FDA approval, you have rapid access to pharmacologics. What you see in other European markets is sometimes a slower delay, a lag due to HTA, Health Technology Assessment, or further assessment by national governments. But what happens here, and I think we all need to get sort of used to this, is the fact that cancer is very special in the sense that drugs are coming with more immature data sets, early data sets. One of the examples that Dr. Bach gave earlier was Xalkori, which actually launched solely with phase 2 data alone. So I think we need to become comfortable with the fact that oncology medications are going to continue to enter the market early with premature data sets, which also confounds comparative effectiveness analysis and other features. But out of all breakthrough designations granted, a third of those were for oncology. What this says is that time to market in the United States is largely something that's to the benefit of a manufacturer looking at a commercial pursuit. Whether it was a car or a loaf of bread or a pharmaceutical, the faster you can get to the market to your peak share, the more value your product's going to have. Okay, so this is where we come into some other pricing levers with the peak. And the peak has really 3 pieces to it. What price can you charge? How big is the volume? And market share. Now, Dr. Bach has presented what's probably the most often cited pricing paper in the United States because of the rapid increase in costs. I'm going to show you some data that's actually going to show that volume has halved or gone down to a third of the size in the same period of time. I think one of the paradoxes may be that people expect the same price for smaller populations, which is essentially carving off half of the pie. That would undoubtedly influence the amount of development going into this space. And oncology is still the leading therapy area in terms of development for obvious reasons. But let me show you some of the data. The final one is market share, and I think this one's interesting because ASCO is taking bold initiatives to try to reframe the debate. But the group has already discussed several of the confounding factors with, let's say, interchangeability, competitive aspects that are kind of different in this setting. So let's talk about those. The first one being price. Let's talk about strategy. Typically, there are three ways you can price a drug. You can try to maximize the profit. You trade off some sort of volume for some sort of price, and then you get the maximal profit curve. You can also try to price so you can maximize the population. Now, why would you ever want to give up price to max population? Well, if you have a follow-on product or a combo product, the broader base you can get in the initial stage, the more money you can get in the end. Then you can also go after the price maximization strategy. This is commonly seen in orphan diseases. It's where price elasticity does not, let's say, change much when you increase the price. And what happens is you have a very small set of patients that you will need to recoup your investment from. Okay, so when setting out this, you also look at factors of the disease and say, how does the disease impact my strategy? There was a paper on the economics of pharmacy that talked about 6 different types of drugs: the fast pay, the slow pay, the long pay. It talked about a lot of different ways that drugs can be priced. If you look at things that are a set duration of therapy, the pricing strategy there would be very different from a statin you may take your entire life. Okay? So what you see here is a series of laws. At the top, you'll see oral parity laws, step-through therapy laws, mandated coverage of trial costs in different states. And over here, you can see what's the newest, which is specialty tier cost-sharing out-of-pocket maximums. Now, what this expresses is that there is a huge regulatory or legislative burden placed on payers, tying their hands. So when we talk about things such as price and their ability to manage, they are restricted in many different ways. And what this also distinguishes, as one of our earlier panelists said, I don't talk about what I wish would happen, but I talk about what is today. And so barring any local legislative action, this is the way oncology is handled. It is deemed, according to politicians, as special. But this also impacts the way that price can be dealt with and managed. Now into volume, which is a little more interesting. With volume, you can see that cancers aren't all the same. So the example I often hear is that, why would you pay the same for a Volkswagen that you would for a Ferrari, right? And this is one of the things about value in our industry. But the problem is you would never try to sell, for instance, a Volkswagen to a population that's so tiny that you can't recoup your investment. In the end, it really depends not only on population size to make your return on the investment for innovation, but it also depends on different factors, number of treatment alternatives and things such as that. And the thing is that the 4 major tumor types, you can see they offer pretty healthy population or prevalence sizes, but there's also a wide disparity in terms of mortality. And so the unmet need in these settings may also be very different. What you can see here is a study that we conducted using French data from the National Health System. Luckily, the French system publishes every year the addressable population for every drug that launches. So you can see over time if drug launches are becoming smaller in terms of the populations that can go after are larger. Between 2001 and 2013, 80% of therapies back then were for first-line therapy, 40% are today. So not only are we going after cancers that are small niches or pieces of the pie, but we're also going after later-line therapy. As you can see, second-line therapy, 20% to 60%. And I think part of this is also because we're having a more nuanced understanding of diseases. If you look at 60 years ago, the way we looked at hematology or diseases of the blood has changed dramatically, and each of these slices gives a smaller volume for the manufacturer to actually recoup their costs. I think interestingly enough, the lung cancer example shows how just in a short period of time, we've also seen this rapid change. And now where we're looking at molecular profiles in addition to histology, what we're finding is that even something such as ALK, which is expressed in perhaps 6% of patients, that's a very small and niche patient population in order to recoup your costs. So over that same period of time in our analysis, we showed that companion diagnostics were included in 20% of drug launches in 2001, It's up to 40% in 2013. So we're seeing, again, this focus on the smaller, more niche patient population. And here's the data overall on the average population. What I would say is that about 242 patients per year are lost per drug launch over the last decade or more. What this means is that we're getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So if you had an eligible population of about 6,000 patients in 2001, today that would be around 3,000 patients. You doubled the price of drugs, you've halved the volume of drugs. So I think some of this also takes an understanding of the way manufacturers look at this life cycle of the curve of how you recoup your investment costs. So now onto the last piece here. And the last piece has, let's say, some interesting pieces to it. What you'll see here is the number of medications indicated by different, in different tumor types. What you're going to see is that the brandeds and generics provide different options, but the interchangeability of these is not always just cut and dry. However, as we stated, the way that you compete is by number of alternatives in one therapy area. If you can't interchange a Herceptin for a Perjeta, then you really don't have a choice to make. The other thing you'll see is that this war has been going on for a long time. In some tumor types, the first drug was entered the market 54 years ago, and still today we're having drugs launched in the setting. What it shows you is a long, hard slog. It's something that people are trying to fight, this war on cancer. But it also shows that the average time lag between the first drug and today is 35 years for drugs in these different tumor types. So again, when looking for alternatives, you have to ask yourself, are we getting more competitive? So the example I provide here is from prostate cancer, and you can see what was very simple just a decade ago has become much more complex. And so I think there are natural forces in the marketplace that are already carving up the different slices of market share you see. And where these therapies end up in the different treatment paradigms will have a large impact on their commercial opportunity as well. But what you see here is also that comparative effectiveness research is rather poor. About a third of trials for cancer in the last decade have actually been launched with comparative effectiveness data. So notwithstanding the significant heterogeneity that we discussed across tumor types earlier today, there's also very poor data. So how do you come with a premature data set and compare that to something to make a value judgment? These are very difficult questions that ASCO is dealing with at the very moment. But more importantly, I think we've seen change come. And you can see down here, out of all of the work that PCORI is doing, the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, you can see 10% of that was allocated for oncology. And I think on the micro level, you see institutions like Dr. Bach's institution making their own comparative effectiveness judgments, like the Zaltrap example that's been so broadly publicized. So I think what's important here is to understand that physicians control an immense amount of power in the fact that they control market share, speed to uptake, and other factors like that. But I think they should also admit that there are some perverse and counterproductive incentives within their own compensation structure. We've seen this in terms of shifting site of care. The data on the right actually shows a difference between costs for certain medications in the HOPD setting or hospital outpatient setting versus in the physician office setting. You can see the buy-in bill, which used to have a perverse or, let's say, profit-seeking incentive. You can see 340B pricing. About a third of all hospitals now consider them 340B. And then you can see that there are also issues that we don't make ourselves aware of, such as contracting. Contracting is usually commercial in confidence. It's something that's private. We never know about it. So if it exists, the patient never sees that. The physician never sees that. The other thing is, though, and I brought this up before, is the ambition of what the ASCO group is doing. And I think it's a noble effort to bring the discussion of value to the forefront. This is a way that they can engage patients. It's a way to engage the broader societal perspective. And it's potentially a way to reframe the debate, so at least there's the transparency that Dr. Safar discussed earlier today as well. So who should decide? This is data from a large study that my firm conducted. They looked at over 500 people in the general population, 150 patients, 150 caregivers, and they said, who should decide? And you can see that the patients really are vested in the treatment decision. They want to talk about the different things they have to deal with, the side effects, the potential alternatives. You can see the physicians are right there. Interestingly enough, I thought they'd be higher. And who pays? The insurance company, but they also took a large amount of responsibility in saying that they have skin in the game. Okay? So this is well understood, but I guess the real question is there too much skin in the game? So this was a study that specifically looked at patients. It was a survey that was done, I believe, in 2006. or 2010. And what it did is it showed that about 80% of patients paid less than $10,000 in terms of cost. We've heard the number cited today that the average out-of-pocket somewhere $4,800 to $5,000. So the question is that okay? And what you'll see here are two different studies, one looking at the amount that patients are willing to pay for generous specialty drug coverage. And you can see on average they're willing to pay something like $25 or more per month for a generous specialty coverage. And what you can see here on the right, I call it the willingness to pay for hope. They said, how much would you pay for a hopeful therapy? And what you can see here is that a large percentage of the patients are willing to pay exactly that amount they're paying today. So yes, the sky is falling, but really are there things that can be done? Okay, so time to loss of exclusivity in a normal market would show a rapid cliff at the end of market exclusivity or loss of exclusivity. What you see, as was described earlier today, is the number of therapy or number of competitors in a market. As it increases, you actually see a rapid decrease in cost. This is in oncology care. Now, interestingly enough, this doesn't always happen in oncology because a big chunk of what you prescribe are biologics, which have biosimilars, which are not biosames, which are not in our market very well. So if we actually look at the average price discount for common biologics in European markets, you'll see the average discount on a biosimilar is somewhere 20 to 30% on average. Now, this is enough to usually move share. Is it enough for a physician to prescribe something for fear of a lawsuit for not giving them the biosame? Is it enough for people to actually start to shift their behavior? These are questions I think that your community is going to have to answer as you pursue the next phase in treatment with biosimilars. But interestingly enough, there are also laws the states are implementing to try to address this issue at the moment. This could be seen by some as a challenge because of differing regulations, but by others it could also be seen as an opportunity. And they realize this and they want to try to define it so that they can stimulate the market. What you can see here is a clinic setting estimate of the total sales for different therapies. About 50 to 60% of all sales are for biologics. And if you look at some of the top drugs on this list, they're older drugs. These biologics, if you could even reduce the price of 50% of the market share by 20 to 30%, I don't even think we'd be having this discussion right now. So I think there are things that can be done to make the market like a more normal market, if there is such a thing in pharmaceuticals. But I think there's also some other things we can look at in terms of this crisis. So let me provide a devil's advocate view of this in the last 5 to 10 minutes. Now, prices have been increasing. Nobody denies that. Okay? If you look, though, at other markets, you also see they're having the same problem. So this isn't isolated. Don't feel like America's special. You know, people are getting older faster in markets all around the world, and healthcare costs are skyrocketing. So this is not a unique problem to the United States, but if you actually look at cancer spending, and if we look at it as a percent of total healthcare spending, it's remained remarkably consistent for over half a century. Okay? Now, granted, expenditures are high. But if I compare this to other global markets, we actually spend less as a percent of total health expenditures on cancer than other markets. So I'm asking, why? Where's the crisis? Cancer is a costly condition. You see it increasing. We see COPD and asthma, osteoarthritis, joint pain. You see many other factors. And these are things I think we have to discuss because cancer is different. It affects a very small population. It has a very high mortality. It's different from many of the different things. So I said, the media can't be wrong. But then I actually started looking. And I only provided an excerpt here because I thought it was really interesting. And I have a fantastic team of consultants, including Akwasi Asaber, who spent countless hours looking through folios at libraries. And what you'll see is not only in the 80s and the 70s, not only in the 70s, but the 60s. Not only in the 60s, but in the 50s. Not only in the 50s, but in the 40s. Not only in the 40s, but in 1917. Not only in 1917, but in 1893, the cost of drugs was in focus. So I asked myself, is this media sensationalism? So anyways, after looking at these, I needed to get a coffee and say, what am I really doing here? And I found out that there was probably a little bit more nuanced view I could take. So this is data from the last decade looking at the issues. This is published in Pharmaceutical Executive magazine looking at the different types of articles that are published on pharmaceuticals every year. What you can see is on average it's remarkably consistent. About 10% of media coverage is about the price of drugs. This is over the last decade. Now, I know you've seen a lot in the news recently, but I'm just trying to ask the question. Is this something that's just being gobbled up? Is it the issue? Are we focusing on the right things? So we have a gargantuan challenge here. As I said, mortality is significant in this area. It's a significant burden to our society, to our health systems, to our family members, to our loved ones. It's sudden in terms of its onset, and that's one of the things that I think patients feel most unmet need for. You'll also see that cost wasn't the #1 concern. So this was the same study where we looked at 500 people from the general population, patients, and also caregivers. What you can see is the top 4 concerns that they have, the patients in the orange, wasn't cost if you look across the different groups. What you can see, though, is not being able to continue to do things, not being able to pay for cancer treatment is here, dying as a result of cancer, feeling sick from cancer treatments, effects of illness on family and friends. There's a broader discussion here about how we're treating and what we can do to do better, okay? And not just that, but as I close up here, I will say that there have been studies looking at the overall investment and return on investment of cancer development. In the US, from about $60 billion in costs, 40% of that is from the US government or the federal government. The rest comes from other sources. If you think about that, oncology is the largest area of R&D. Furthermore, the authors concluded, if you can reduce mortality 1% in cancer care, it would be worth in the long term over $500 billion to Americans and future Americans. So the question is, if price isn't about past investments, it's about future investments. I would like everybody just to take a critical look and ask, really, what is the problem and how can we focus on it? I think ASCO's initiative is taking a, let's say, very brave and very honorable path in terms of addressing that. But there's other problems. The system has problems. The system has waste. The system has cost. And so I liken it kind of drug pricing to looking at the sun. Right? To spite the sun because it hurts your eyes is to lose something that's very beautiful, something that nourishes us and feeds us and all these other things. And so I think a broader discussion, a broader dialogue other than cancer bashing or cancer drug pricing bashing, I think could be healthy for our system. Hopefully I've started that discussion today. Hopefully I won't need to run out of the back door. But I'll leave you with these pieces, and I'll open it up for question and answer for the last 10 minutes.